work on that. She's actually here working on the side of me. Oh, look, there she is. There she is. So I'll just start talking. We may have to reboot the whole sucker again because things don't apparently want to work tonight. But many of you have probably seen these headlines. This has all happened pretty much since this semester began, actually about a week before. Yeah, exactly a week before the semester began. I want to say it was August 15. August.
Save before you restarted that?
Probably not for a while, but give it a whirl. So it's dead. So we need to reboot this whole thing?
No, just the program. But if you hadn't saved, it's not going to have this version of it.
Okay. Well, I might have just lost all my presentation. That's okay. We'll figure out something. Oh, God, that's going to suck. Yeah, I lost a lot. So actually now we're just going ad hoc because not one single element of this is going to work tonight. So I'll just talk. You guys ask questions. I'll try without graphics or notes to do my best. So just a week or two before classes began, I want to say August 14, 15, 16, it started hitting the news that something was going on in Afghanistan. The U.S. troops were pulling out. The current Biden administration of the United States had said just months before, pretty much at the beginning of the summer, we're winding down operations. The two presidents before Biden said, yes, we would like to wind down operations. And starting in about May is when major troop deployments started getting pulled back. And before I even get to that, the U.S.-led war in Afghanistan had been winding down for about the last 5 or 6 years. I really kind of look at 2011 as a sentinel kind of crossing the Rubicon point, where the U.S., after being in Afghanistan for a decade, and it pretty much was 1 decade. Did I lose the whole thing?
No, I'm trying.
Okay.
Keep talking.
The U.S. went into Afghanistan in 2001. You probably know a major event that happened in 2001 that's related to that. And was there about a decade when another major event happened, and that major event was the killing of the dude who had caused the first event. Hint, hint, if you know what I'm referring to. And ever since then, 2011, the U.S. started to kind of say, it's probably time for us to get out of here. And it pretty much took another whole decade to get to that point. Here we are 1 decade after 2011. Here in 2021, yeah, we're now out. So things were starting to wind down. We could even say a decade ago. It's early, but by 2015, 2016, the writing was on the wall. Forces were already moving out. The maximum amount of U.S. forces and firepower there was probably way back in 2007, 2008, 2009. So this is a war that everybody wanted to get into initially, and that everybody wanted to get out of soon after that. And it took a decade for that to happen. Now we'll get up to the super current events of why did it happen right this second? Why are so many of you hitting me up to explain this stuff? Okay. And it was really at the beginning of the summer that the Biden administration said, yeah, okay, we've been talking about this for a decade. We think it's time now. We're going to start pulling back the groups of folks that we have left, protecting major cities, major military installations around Afghanistan. And the same time that was happening, this group called the Taliban started ramping up. And as the U.S. withdrew, the Taliban just took over. And almost a 1-to-1 scenario. And then when it really hit the fan just a few weeks back, before the semester began in August 15, 16, 17, is the U.S. then had most of everybody out, was doing its kind of final push to get major groups of people, mostly U.S. personnel and American citizens, and its allies and its ally citizens out of Afghanistan. And at that point, everything just kind of collapsed. And that's why you see these headlines. Kabul airport plunges into chaos. Chaos turns into carnage from The Guardian. Afghanistan falls to the Taliban again. What's that mean for you folks that are just now 21 years old? It's interesting, by the way, that many of you in the class right now are under 20 years of age. That means this entire war happened in your lifetime. The U.S. has been in Afghanistan your entire life. So Of course you didn't know what the hell was going on when you were born or when you were even 5. This is the second time the Taliban has taken over. We'll get to that. Afghanistan falls to the Taliban again as the U.S.-backed government collapses. How the Afghan army collapsed under Taliban pressure in pretty much 10 days. It's really been shocking to a lot of folks around the world to see this happen. However, if you know the story, if you know kind of even the broad brush strokes of the story of how Afghanistan got to this point in 2021, quite frankly, it's no mystery at all, and it's not shocking in the least. I do not like to sound like a Mr. Know-It-All, but you can really talk to anybody who's followed this story. And one of the benefits of age, by the way, I'm super old. And one of the benefits of this is I've been paying attention to this particular story because I started teaching classes 25 years ago and had reported on the Taliban when they rose to power the first time. So this particular world issue, I've been following since its inception. So again, I'm not a Mr. Know-It-All. Anybody in the military, anybody who served time over there, probably anybody that served time, any historians, military folks, strategists, what happened in the last month in Afghanistan is not shocking to any of us. In fact, the writing was on the wall right from the get-go. And in fact, maybe this feels like a test question already, one of the reasons that I would say that it took the United States 10 years to pull out of Afghanistan is because everybody knew it was going to end like this. Everybody knew it was going to happen. This really bad thing was going to happen, and it was going to unfold in a tragic way. And so the U.S. and its military advisors and its presidents and politicians were like, well, no one wants this. No one wants Afghanistan to collapse. No one wants the Taliban to be back in charge. No one wants women and children to become enslaved to a radical right-wing nut group. Nobody wants that. And so they tried for 10 years to boost up the government and the Afghan government and boost up the Afghan military and train them and do all these things so that they would become a state that could handle themselves. And again, everyone who watches this is like, it's not going to work, and it didn't. So that's the upfront kind of what happened in the last month and what happened in the last decade, if not the last 2 decades, that led up to what looks to you as an observer who's seeing things with fresh eyes. You're like, wow, this is the craziest thing ever. It's really not. It was a wildly predictable thing. But now let's get to how my brain works. And I'll tell you some background of this particular place in this particular time. And it'll be less surprising to you why all this unfolded. Again, will we get to this all tonight? Probably not. I'm fairly long-winded, and I want to encourage questions along the way. So we'll get as far as we can in an hour, and then I'll try to find a natural break, and then we'll pick it up again, maybe sometime this week, maybe next Monday, and we'll have another quiz on it. So I did always forget to welcome everyone in the chat room. I will try to keep up with the questions as they are posed. If you actually want to just do a shout out or say hi or high five or gift me something or however it works here on the awesome Twitch. And I already see IDCIs in the hizzle going, points, points, points. Oh, the one above it says, are you going to do any in-person lectures soon? Good question. Reivax Purple. I'll do what I can. It's a very busy semester, but I will do what I can. And I did put in the syllabus that I wanted to actually get back to doing a in-person a world leaders quiz on screen. So we still have that in the works, and that might entail having some live lectures before we actually do that in-person live quiz. So stay on me about it. Keep bothering me. Hit me up on the emails and tell me you want that, and I'll try to work it in. Okay? So welcome, everybody. If you have, thanks. It's Ray Va Purple. Ray Va Purple. Thank you, Ray Va. If you have a question about the content we're covering, go in and pose it in the chat room, and Katie will filter it to me. You can even say, hey, Katie, ask him this. mostly because I'm old. I can't keep up with the chat room and presenting at the same time. But that's why the ever awesome Katie's here to try to make sure that all serious questions are submitted to me so I can answer them here in this awesome interactive Twitch format. We love the Twitch platform because of its interactivity, so I don't want this to be all one way. Let me ask you, what do you want to know about this Afghan situation? What did you already know? Was there something specific that you kind of knew some stuff, but you're like, I don't get this part? Hit me up with those and we'll start dealing with them along the way. So, my kind of title slide for this is The End. The end of the Us Afghan War. And I already have planned for next week, if not sooner, that a whole separate slideshow I'll do and talk on the implications of the geopolitical change because the U.S. is now officially out of Afghanistan. And all sorts of new relationships and possible new conflicts will arise because of the departure of the once a mighty United States. Still mighty, maybe, depending on your point of view. Okay, so now let's get to some other groundwork here. I gave you the basic intro of why things seem shocking and all these things that unraveled in the last month. And now let's start doing some serious groundwork of like, okay, what is this Afghanistan war? For most of you in college right now, again, the United States has occupied and or controlled a sovereign state on the planet named Afghanistan your entire life, your entire lifetime. And that's now coming to an end. So it's kind of a big deal that your life coincides with a major chapter of U.S. foreign policy, and the page is being turned literally this semester. It is the longest war in United States history. Woo, almost by a long shot. I can't remember what the official tally on the Vietnam War was. And I think that's the second longest. But the Afghan War officially ended pretty much just shy of 2 decades. Just shy of 20 years, the U.S.'s longest war. And many would say the forgotten war. For those that have been following, myself included, anybody, I don't know, say age 30 or above, probably has followed a little bit. The Afghan War had pretty much disappeared from headlines a decade ago. And it was even spottily reported on for 5 years before that. So it was a big deal when it started, as all wars are. And then it kind of drug on for 5 years, and everybody stopped paying attention for 5 years. Then a big event happened, and then everybody just kind of stopped paying attention altogether, and that was the better part of the last decade. So the longest war, the forgotten war, and some of the points I'm going to cover here to explain why this unfolded the way it did, is that there was a predecessor war to this. One could say many predecessor wars in Afghanistan. But for this storyline, so that you understand current state of Afghanistan, I do have to touch upon another war, the Soviet-Afghan War of 1979-1989, the Afghan Civil War, which wasn't much of a civil war. Something about the September 11th attacks, how timely this commemorated the 20th year of the September 11th attacks back in 2001. Yeah, remember how I just said that this war was just shy of 20 years and we are just commemorating the 20th anniversary of 9/11? Are those two things related? Yeah, one-to-one they're related. Then I'll mention how we can look at the U.S.-led war in Afghanistan versus the war in Afghanistan of just the last 5 years. These are minor differences, but they help me understand, and hopefully I can help you understand why I'm couching it this way, while I'll break apart the timeline this way. Okay, so more groundwork. The longest war, the percentage of U.S. population that has been born since the 2011 attacks is 1 out of every 4. 25% of the citizens of the United States currently alive were not born 20 years ago. Have no memory